Thanks everyone for joining. I'm going to start sharing my screen in a minute to sort of talk through what I've got to discuss today. But just to give you some context, obviously the event is about effective social media marketing. What I've really focused on here is sort of putting a bit of a spin on the effective side and actually going in depth into cost effective social media marketing. So not only getting results, but getting them in a cost effective fashion. Just with what's going on in the world at the moment, feedback I've heard from business owners over the last few weeks, there's a big focus on people wanting to promote their business still, or their organization, or not for profit, or whatever you're doing. I've tried to make it as universally applicable as possible. People are still really interested in getting their message and their value out to the community and out to their audience, but people are obviously concerned about how they're able to do it in a manner that's not going to cost too much money. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start sharing my presentation, and hopefully everyone will be able to see it. So hopefully people can see that. Pipe up in the chat if it can't be seen. But yeah, I'm going to dive in. So just to give you some context, what we're going to talk through today is a few different things. The first area we're going to look at is why cost effectiveness is really important. The next piece we're going to look at is why social media is actually a good option in this regard. Then we're going to cover 9 effective steps you can follow to improve the performance of what you're doing. And then we'll do a bit of a recap and a Q&A and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully you, if you've got questions, it's probably easier just with the way this works to leave it until the end, just because, it's going to allow us to move faster through the original or main part of the presentation. So to get started, let's actually start, at a very basic level and say, why is cost effectiveness so important when we talk about social media marketing? Why worry too much about that? And there's a really simple reason at the moment that I think has crystallized it into a lot of business owners and organization owners' minds, and that's COVID-19, the coronavirus crisis. I think I read this morning there's about 4.9 billion people in the world are under some form of lockdown, which is pretty extraordinary when you think about it, and it's having enormous ramifications, not just in a health perspective, but in a social perspective and in a economic perspective as well. So in the social perspective, as James alluded to, we're more isolated now. At the moment, we can't see people so effectively, but we can still communicate digitally, through mediums such as this, but also things like social media. So there's that aspect of it, which is one reason why getting your message out on social media is such a good idea. And the second aspect is that the financial and economic impacts are actually having a really big, adverse effect on business and on what's going on sort of, economically at the moment. This is just some stats, that it came out not too long ago, I think maybe a few days ago, just looking at, what coronavirus has done to, say, stock markets, some of the bigger ones, Japan, USA, and UK. New Zealand's followed a similar trend. I mean, that's, it's crazy numbers to look at when you see how quickly things have unfolded. It's kind of weird to think that sort of a month ago, it felt a little bit abstract. If anyone's like me, it was kind of like, okay, this is a problem that's happening overseas. We're probably going to see some impacts here, but very quickly things have changed. Hopefully this is easy enough to see on the screen, but I thought this was a pretty staggering statistic here. So this is from the United States. I don't know when the same sort of data will come out here in New Zealand, but this is looking at unemployment claims in America. So, going along the bottom axis, you've got the years. So you can see like 2009, that was, with the last financial crisis, there was an increase. Then things have sort of gone back to smaller numbers of unemployment. And then if you look right at the far end, 2020, last week in America alone, 6.6 million people filed for unemployment. So more than the entire population of New Zealand by a significant factor. And that was on top of the 3.4 million people the week before that. So it's truly extraordinary, when you consider the numbers and the impact this is having. And so what's that all got to do with social media marketing and sort of promoting your business? Well, the thing is, a lot of business budgets are really under stress at the moment. Businesses I work with, that I've spoken to in depth about this, are all reporting anywhere from sort of 30 to, in some cases, 100% reduction in their revenue. which has a really massive impact on how you promote what you're doing. If you're at that sort of startup phase, you might find, for example, that funding gets pulled. So you were expecting some funding to come through for your startup enterprise, from investment, and then suddenly people are getting cold feet because probably their financial position has shifted quite substantially as well. So all these things all interact together. And obviously I'm biased in saying it because what I do is marketing for a living. But I think that pulling back too aggressively on how you promote your business, especially at the moment, is not a good move. It's kind of like doubling down in the wrong direction. So not only, if you think about a pizza, not only at the moment is the size of the pizza shrinking rather rapidly, but if you stop marketing and promoting your business or your organization or your club or whatever you're trying to promote, what's going to happen is you're actually going to get a shrinking piece of a shrinking pizza or a shrinking pie. So you kind of double down in the wrong direction, and things slow quite a bit faster than they would have done. So marketing at the moment may not necessarily mean growing. It may just mean treading water. It may even just mean stemming the tide a little bit, kind of holding back, I guess, that, the sort of flood of potential revenue loss and all those kinds of things. So, I mean, there's that element of it sort of shifting your mindset a little bit right now to maybe marketing success isn't what it was 3, 6, 12 months ago. Maybe it's just allowing you to sort of, tread water until things pick up a little bit. And that's why I'm really interested in sort of exploring, hey, how do we use social media in a cost-effective fashion, but also a sort of results-effective fashion as well. So that's just to give you some context about where I'm coming at with this presentation, and hopefully you'll find it interesting. Because what tends to happen in my experience is that faced with a situation like this, I mean, this is relatively unprecedented. Certainly the last time there was anything this big that happened economically was 10 years ago, and I don't even think that was probably quite so severe, but I'm happy to be corrected on that. But what will tend to happen is people will, very aggressively take the scissors to the marketing budget, and you can quite quickly find that really does put you in a very disadvantaged position. So what we want to do instead, if you've got a business or a startup or an organization and you're under a bit of that financial pressure, from a revenue perspective, and you've got to look to cut your marketing costs, what I'm trying to encourage you to do is say, hey, let's cut strategically. So let's identify things we can do that are still going to allow us to reach people. We're still going to get our name out there, our value messaging, but we're not going to cut so aggressively that all of a sudden everyone, sort of stops hearing about us. Because it's one thing to cut activity if you're a well-established brand. So if you're, say, let's use, probably one of the easiest examples, McDonald's, right? We all know the brand. If McDonald's stop advertising, stop promoting, they have a large amount of brand equity built up. So people are still going to remember who they are, and they've got that sort of, they're almost omnipresent, right? Everywhere you go, just about anywhere in the world, you'll see a McDonald's. You probably can't go a single day driving somewhere or walking somewhere without seeing one. At least in Western countries. So they've got a lot of brand equity. So big businesses like that with established reputations, brand equity, they can often get away with cutting marketing more aggressively in some respects. Paradoxically, they tend to be the ones who cut the least aggressively as well. But we won't go into that side of things. But basically, if you're a smaller business, a startup, you're not really well established in the marketplace, you can very quickly lose your voice. So that's why it's so important to look at opportunities like social media to get your name out there. So let's look at why social media is such a good option at the moment. So the first reason is that there's so many different platforms you can use, and all of them have their own user bases. All of them have their own opportunities. All of them have their own strategies and things that we can leverage to try and really get the business name out there a bit more, get your messaging out there. So you've got a sort of diversity of opportunity, which I think is really critical at the moment, because different people are going to be consuming things in different ways. One person might be spending their lockdown time at home just scrolling Instagram all day, or someone else might be spending that time on LinkedIn. I'll lump in things like YouTube as well in here as well. I mean, it's not strictly a social network, but there are quite strong elements of it in there. If you look at the stats around more and more people watching YouTube videos at the moment, for example, because they're stuck at home with not a lot to do. Once again, this huge variety of channels we can leverage is really advantageous, because with more and more people spending more and more time on their devices, on their computers, looking at social media, it's kind of where you want to be at the moment to some extent. Another thing is that there's always novel opportunities coming up. So I'll touch on that later. But things like TikTok, for example, have come along and started to sort of explode in popularity. There's always new things coming to the marketplace. And social media can offer quite an opportunity for businesses that move quickly. Now, I don't claim to be a TikTok expert much because the businesses I work with, it's not really their space. But from purely a sort of conceptual perspective, that whole idea of being able to leverage these sort of ripe hunting grounds, as it were, we want to be taking advantage of that. And there's some other reasons we should look at social media as well. It's a great way to build trust with your audience. At the moment, my view is that businesses that are able to build trust, organizations that can build trust with their target audience, are the ones that are going to come out of this better than anyone else. Obviously there's the sort of nuts and bolts cash flow side of the business that I'm not going into here. That's one thing. But from a marketing, branding, advertising perspective, these are really tough, unprecedented times for a lot of people. Everyone's a bit nervous, unsure what's going on. So if you're able to build trust with the people you're trying to communicate with by showcasing your personality, showcasing your trustworthiness, showcasing your value, that people are going to be more likely to buy from you. And buy, with the word buy, it doesn't have to be a product or a service. If it's, if you're a not-for-profit or if you're a club or something like that, buy may just mean people taking you up on whatever it is you offer, whatever it is you do. Another reason why social media is so great at the moment is it's effective one-to-many communication. So, if you've got a Facebook audience or a LinkedIn audience or anything like that, you can communicate to them all in one go, which is really handy, especially around, communicating what's happening with your business or your organization. People will often switch off, to certain channels. I know probably most of us here would have received huge numbers of emails from businesses, communicating, hey, here's what we're doing in response to COVID-19. And there's definitely a certain logic in communicating that message via email, but equally you can get that message out via, your social channels. It's a little bit less in your face. It's a little bit less, aggressive. You're not invading people's inboxes with the same message that everyone's sending out. So you've got another one-to-many communication pathway. A big one at the moment, and even ongoing, to be honest, even when things start to pick back up, is if you do social media effectively, you can reduce the cost of advertising. So to make it clear, I'm focusing today primarily on the organic side of things. So how we build up audiences, how we sort of, grow the engagement, how we get them to work a bit more, socially, as it were. And the last piece, and this is a terrible choice of wording in the current climate, but it is the right term, is with the right application and process to how we do social media, you increase the chance of spreading virally. I apologize once again for the wording, but really there is some great opportunity there. If you can post something to a Facebook page or a LinkedIn profile or a YouTube channel or whatever it is, and you start getting that go viral, people are sharing it with their friends, sharing it with their family, you can, basically wind up getting hundreds, potentially thousands, in some cases, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of exposure for basically no cost. Now, I want to make it really clear from the outset, you can't really plan for virality unless you're a celebrity, basically, or a massive brand. If you're, Nike or Kim Kardashian or someone like that, because of the fact you've got an enormous database of people across your social channels, pretty much it's like the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, right? You're more likely to succeed with whatever you post. But for us humble people, of sort of smaller organization stature, it's very hard to say, oh, I'm sure this post I'm going to make on Facebook is going to go viral and people are going to go crazy for it. But it's one of those things we don't want to overlook as well. So it's a bit like a windfall. Don't bank on it, but when it happens, leverage it as much as you can. So hopefully that gives you some good reasons on why we're looking to use social media. So let's now get stuck into how we actually get better performance. So this is really the nuts and bolts of this presentation. So the first piece I want to make really clear, if you're wanting to do social media effectively for your organization, for your business, is to align the channels, so the social platforms, with what your business or organization does. So this is one area where I see a lot of people come a bit unstuck. is they try to be everywhere at once. Being omnipresent, being, utilizing every single social media channel effectively is really challenging. So I think you're better off to focus on the ones that make the best sense for what it is you do. So for example, if you sell high ticket business to business products or services, maybe you've got a long sales cycle. So a lot of the clients I work with on a consulting basis, that's what they do. They're selling high value items to other businesses. It's often 3 to 18 months to put a deal together. And they're talking at that sort of corporate or commercial level. That's when you want to be on something like LinkedIn, because you've got that ability to connect with decision makers. You can advertise if you do want to advertise based on job titles, industries, all those kinds of things. It's a more professional platform. But on the other hand, something like Instagram or Snapchat, for a lot of the businesses I work with, it's not quite so relevant. And the reason it's not so relevant is that it's not the right type of audience. Now, the flip side of the coin is that if you've got a highly visual product, you've got a lifestyle brand, something like that, then visual focused platforms like Instagram and Pinterest, Snapchat to another extent, they can be way better opportunities. So what's really key to think about is trying to align. My view is that Facebook still for now is a very good bread and butter option. I'm yet to kind of encounter a business that doesn't make sense to have a Facebook presence, because it's, despite the fact it's a little bit yesterday's news to some extent, it's still, the big player in town. It still gives you the opportunity to use things like the Facebook advertising ecosystem, which you can then use to advertise on Instagram as well. But the key point here is that you probably can't afford, both in terms of time and possibly even in terms of money, to be everywhere at once. So pick what makes sense. Now, without knowing what it is your business or organization does, it's very hard for me to say, I can't give generic advice necessarily over this conference call as to what makes the most sense for you. But just have a think, if you're going after that sort of corporates, you're going after, business decision makers, those kinds of things, LinkedIn is probably more where you want to be. Facebook as well. Possibly something like YouTube. I'm going to lump that in as a social network, as I mentioned before. On the other hand, maybe if you're trying to build more of, say, like a personal brand for your business or organization, things like Instagram, even if you are selling to businesses, could still be really good, because it's going to allow you to visually showcase your personality a bit. So just have a think about all the channels that you could use. Are you spreading yourself too thin? Are you, not enough peanut butter on too much toast, basically, and it doesn't wind up being very good. So don't spread yourself too thin. Pick the channels that make the best sense, and sort of try and align what you do to that. And I think that's going to make the whole process a lot easier for you to manage, and a lot easier to get good results. So moving along, the next piece, sort of following on from this, is to be wary of shiny object syndrome. So this is a really big risk in social media. I think this is where I know I've seen businesses come awry here, is that what happens is periodically new kids will appear on the block. So if anyone remembers Vine, that sort of exploded in popularity, and for a while I remember people saying, oh, this is the place to be, and then that sort of crashed into failure. Google, themselves, basically the largest technology company in the world, to some extent, they weren't even immune. They created Google Plus, and ultimately that turned out to be a complete flop. They folded it. So what I'm saying here is not that you shouldn't look at new opportunities in social media that come up. So, at the moment, TikTok would be the best example of that. It's exploded in popularity. You want to actually try blending these new platforms where it makes sense, because often there's what we call like an early mover advantage. So, if you can get onto a platform early in the piece, it can often be easier to grow an audience, to leverage some of those features. Take Facebook, for example. When Facebook first launched, over 10 years ago, I think it was, the business page functionality, there was way easier organic reach. They were way more generous with that. So you could create a business page and really reach people very effectively without basically having to pay for advertising. And so businesses that got into that early and sort of hedged their bets, even though Facebook may have folded, if you'd stuck through it consistently, you would have been able to leverage that and still be benefiting from that all these years down the track. So you do want to try these new platforms, but excuse me, don't shift completely. That's what I'm trying to say here, is people chase those shiny objects all the time. And this is not just limited to social media marketing. This is a marketing challenge, in general. There's always new strategies, methods, platforms all the time coming up into the marketplace. And what you want to be very wary of, is totally shifting focus. Most of your activity should probably be focused on those gold standard platforms. That's your Facebooks, your LinkedIn's, Twitters, Instagrams, Pinterest, possibly even Snapchat now that's been around for quite a while. These are platforms that have established themselves well, but you also want to then look for these new opportunities as they arise. It's just getting that balance right. Once again, that's going to be hard for me to say percentage-wise what it would be without knowing what your business is and what you do or what your organization does. But certainly don't pivot completely. If some new platform comes out tomorrow and it looks great and everyone's talking about it and, Stuff and NZ Herald and all those kinds of things, give it a go, but don't put all your eggs in that basket, because some of these startup platforms have a tendency to fold, more often than they succeed. So hopefully that makes sense. The next piece of advice I want to share here is to sort of try and minimize your promotional posting and keep your powder dry. So this is sort of talking around the algorithms that social platforms like Facebook use. Facebook are probably the best at this. So Facebook makes money by selling advertising, right? That they went public. Mark Zuckerberg became very wealthy, as did the original founders. You can watch that good movie, I think, that was released about it if you're interested in the story. Or there's tons of information online. But anyway, the way all these platforms make money ultimately is one of two ways. They're either selling information about you, if it's free, you're the product, or they're selling advertising, or a combination of both. And any platform that sells advertising, ultimately, the more organic traffic and reach and everything they can give you, the less chance it is that you're going to actually go and advertise. So what tends to happen here is that businesses especially are bad at this, and retail and e-commerce businesses tend to be the worst by far, is people will fall into this trap of always posting content that relates to purchasing or promoting products. So posting links to products, if you're promoting an event for your club or something, pushing ticket sales only, pushing merchandise, those kinds of things. It feels sensible. It sounds like the kind of thing you should do. But the problem being that any good social media platform, especially your big ones like Facebook, they're going to pick up on that, and they want you to pay to play ultimately. If Facebook gave away 100% organic reach, people probably wouldn't bother with advertising in many respects. So instead, they're good at picking up in their algorithms that, hey, this person is trying to actually promote a product here. We should be getting a cut on this. We should be clipping the ticket. So what I tend to find when I work with clients is that they'll often do primarily product or sort of promotion focused posting on social media. And what I want to encourage you to do is actually look at flipping that on its head a little bit. So instead, think about things you can post that will get your brand and your name out into the marketplace, out in front of your audience, but that aren't necessarily, all about buying now. So, think about funny, informative, entertaining, breaking news type content you can post that, maybe you're going to get more people seeing it. It's not quite so commercial, but it still works to always have that sort of squeaky door or squeaky wheel. You're constantly reminding people in their timeline on Facebook or, scrolling through their feed on Instagram that, hey, you exist. You're not always screaming, buy my product or service. So you're getting more reach. And basically what you're trying to do is use this to juice up your brand. And then when you want to actually come along and promote a product or a service or an offer, make it a really good one. So, don't sort of play your best cards, your trump cards straight away. To, hold them in reserve for when it really makes sense. Because it's a little bit like the story of the boy who cried wolf. If you're always crying, buy now, I've got a great deal on, you don't want to miss out on this. Not only does the algorithm get sick of you because you're trying to hijack it without, paying any money, your audience may also become a little bit sick of it as well. People are always being bombarded with offers. People joke about being the Briscoes of an industry, right? They're always talking sale and offers on now and things. If that's how you want to push your organization and you want to go down that path, that's one thing. But most organizations, businesses I speak to don't want to do that. They want to reach as many people as possible, in their target audience, do it cost effectively. And by minimizing the promotional element of what you do and then keeping your powder dry for good promotions, that's actually going to help you do that. So hopefully that piece makes sense. Hope that helps. So moving on to the next piece, another thing we want to do is look at testing different types of content. So different social channels, different types of content will perform better or worse on them. So for example, on Facebook, video is generally one of the best performers. Now, to give you some context here, talking just before about the algorithms on social networks, the key thing that any good social media platform wants to do is retain a visitor's interest, retain a user's interest. So the longer Facebook can keep you on Facebook, the more valuable you are from their perspective, because the more opportunities they've got to show advertising to you. And so, the more advertising they can sell to you, the higher the sort of revenue per user. And so it all sort of spins off from there. So when you think about, posting content, think about what type of content is going to engage people the most. Now, video, as I said, on Facebook is generally one of the better ones. But if you look at something like LinkedIn, video works well, but oftentimes as far as reaching more people, getting more engagement, text-based posts work the best. And one of the reasons for this is on LinkedIn, what you'll often find is that people, maybe there's an element of sort of people thinking they're more important than they are, but certainly what you get is a lot of people say, hey, look, I don't have a lot of time. I don't want to watch a 10-minute video or something. I just want to consume the key concept in, a 200-word little mini blog post. Or if it's going to be a video, I want a very short one. So try different types of content. Maybe it's on LinkedIn for your organization. It's a combination of a text post with an attached image, or maybe it's video that works best, depending on your industry and what you do. Once again, it's going to vary, but experiment with those different types of content. One other tip I've got is whenever you do video, try and do native video. So what I mean by that is with Facebook, with LinkedIn, with most of these platforms, you have an ability to upload video directly into them. Now, a lot of businesses won't do that. What they'll do is they'll have a YouTube channel and they'll create a vlog or a promotional video or whatever it happens to be, and they'll take the link for that and post it on their Facebook page or post it on their LinkedIn page or LinkedIn profile or Twitter or anything like that. Now, linking off, as soon as you do that, you tend to tank your organic performance because you're trying to take that attention away from the platform. If someone's got to click through to YouTube to watch the video, it's generally not going to perform so well. So if you've got an opportunity to upload a video directly into the social platform you're using, if you're going to do video content, definitely try and do that because you're generally going to reach more people. Doesn't mean you can't also put it into YouTube. You can do that as well. That's a good idea to sort of multi-channel everything. But the more you try and retain people's interest, just always think about, hey, what Facebook or LinkedIn or any of these platforms want is for the people I'm trying to reach and engage to spend as much time here as possible. So think about how you put your message out there in that context, and it tends to make it a little bit more effective. Moving on, another opportunity, and I think this would be really big one for any clubs or organizations or not-for-profits, but even business as well, is looking to leverage user-generated content. So depending on what you do, you may have really good access to user-generated content. So, if you're a club, for example, and you're running events, people might be sending in, or hashtagging on Instagram, all sorts of things, events or video, event images, videos. If you're a business selling products and people love your product, they might be posting, photos or videos of them using it. And user-generated content can be a real gold mine because one of the most common bits of feedback I hear from business owners and organization owners is that people say, hey, how do I make enough content? How do I actually come up with good ideas? I'm sort of stuck. I've thought of everything I can think of. Well, your users, your user base, your customer base, your membership base, if you approach this right, you're going to be able to leverage what they produce and reuse that on your own platforms as well. So look at, start thinking about how can you get user-generated content from events, from products you send out, all those kinds of things. If you're selling a product, for example, can you include something in the documentation of the order that goes out saying, hey, post a video of yourself or take a image of yourself using this product, send it in to us, and we're going to once a month do a draw to give away a free voucher or refund someone their purchase price. At an old job I used to work out, we did that a lot, and we found we would get really good user-generated content for all of our social channels just by running a really simple promotion that was send in, yourself using one of our products, if you're happy for us to promote it, that's obviously part of the terms and conditions. And then, if you did that once a month, we would draw, I think it was a couple of $100 voucher. But what we got out of it in terms of content and opportunities to sort of share authenticity as well, vastly outweighed the cost, of the product we gave away. So really have a think about this, because if you get stuck for content, well, why not leverage other people's ability to create it? And it also helps build the sort of voice and the personality of your organization as well. It does a lot for social proof too. If potential customers or potential members of your organization can see that there are other real people also participating in the process or participating in the use of your product or service, it helps you to convince them as well. It's good for social proof. Next point I want to cover is to be responsive. So social media is generally seen as that sort of one-to-many communication, but it's also a really good way to engage with people on a one-to-one basis. Whether you're running ads or just posting posts, whatever platform you use, people are going to be commenting, and they're going to comment positively and they're going to comment negatively as well. I want to touch on that. But what you should be looking to do is respond to criticism and praise. If you're responding to criticism, or focus on that first, actually. Always be polite, avoid escalating, and remember that some people are just trolls. Some people can't reason with. They're just out there to sort of be miserable. So you've got to be a little bit careful there. And I'll say to clients, hey, look, if someone's being just truly, insufferable and, they're just being unreasonable, most social platforms have the ability to delete someone's comment and ban them from interacting with your page or your profile. Facebook, especially is one where you want to do that. You just get people posting the most ridiculous stuff sometimes, it's crazy. But basically, by being responsive, not only on that one-to-many level, but on that one-to-one level, it really does help to build trust, which I spoke about earlier as being so key, especially in the current climate. It helps build your sort of social presence. It helps build your sort of social validity. And prospective customers or organization members, they're going to look favorably on organizations that respond to others, respond to their peers in a timely and constructive fashion. So even if we just look at Facebook, for example, they have a functionality that sort of switches on a badge. If you respond quickly enough to messages that come through, a lot of people will just default now to messaging. And to give you some context, for example, when this whole COVID-19 thing started to come to the fore here, and travel plans were changing, and Air New Zealand was cancelling flights and all that kind of stuff, I found it faster to get through to them on Facebook message than I did by calling up their support line. And a lot of people go through that kind of path. And if you don't respond quickly, other people will sort of call you out on that as well. There was a travel insurance company that I was dealing with. People were really just roasting them all day long on Facebook, saying, I can't get hold of these guys in any way. But if you could go and jump on that and sort of respond and say, hey, look, we're obviously pretty swamped at the moment. Here's the best way to get hold of us, and try and head that off at the pass. It makes you look better. And it just builds up that authenticity as well. So be responsive, be responsive to criticism, but also be responsive to praise and congratulations as well. And thank people for when they say something nice about, what it is your business is doing, because ultimately, you're probably going to encourage more people to do that as well. And it keeps sort of stacking those benefits on top of each other. So be responsive. It's a really good thing to do. Don't think of it only as a one-to-many communication opportunity. A next piece that's really, really important is to understand the problems you solve and then add value. This is especially important if you're doing social media from the perspective of any kind of complex sales business, startup, B2B enterprise, anything like that. It goes beyond social media actually, but whenever you're doing anything related to marketing, ask yourself a really important question. What problem am I trying to solve for my audience? And then focus your activity around this. So, your wider marketing activity, but also your social media activity. So what problem, does your audience have? What questions do they need answers to? Because it can be all too tempting to post content on social media that we think our audiences would be interested in. But you actually want to make it all about the customer, understanding their problems and their pain, and then adding value through solutions to that and answers to their questions. Now, some businesses, it may be more so, that you've got to actually operate on a slightly more sort of casual level. And what I mean by that is maybe you're just in a space where it's not so much about problem solving or anything. People just want entertainment, or they want news or something like that. So this may not be quite so applicable, but certainly if you have a problem and solution focused business, which I know a lot of businesses are focused around that, understanding that problem really well and then articulating that through all the content you distribute on social media, that's going to be a really effective strategy to get people to engage better. Don't just think that you know what people are interested in reading or seeing. Always frame it through the lens of what someone's wanting to do or wanting to solve. And if you get stuck for content ideas, it even makes that really, quite a bit easier to think about. If you think about, say, all the questions that your target audience might have, all the problems they need solving, straight away there, you can start listing those and come up with good content you could post on your social media, whether it's videos or short little snippets, articles, infographics, those kinds of things. You can turn basically all of those ideas, all of those problems, all of those pain points into very useful information that you can distribute to your audience. And one more point here is that if you can actually dress this up, with humor, with entertainment, that's even better. So obviously, you don't want to be too dry. Depending on your audience, you've got to be a little bit careful with how you frame things. You don't want to jump straight into humor if you're a really serious business, potentially. But basically, if you can dress up your message in a more socially appealing way, then that's going to help as well. But certainly understanding the problems and then adding value and solving them and using your content to do that, that's a really key way to boost performance and be more effective. Now, the next point here is a really crucial one, and that's to be consistent and diligent. Where I see a lot of businesses fall off the rails with effective social media marketing is they start off really, enthusiastically, and then things drop off over time. And their social media profiles wind up looking like sort of ghost towns, just tumbleweeds blowing through. You want to be consistent and diligent with your activity. You're actually better to be steady and consistent than sort of explode up with a peak. And, I'm going to post every day to my company Facebook and LinkedIn. And then 3 months later, you haven't done anything for the last 2 months because you sort of, got exhausted and got bored and got fed up. In my opinion, it looks really unprofessional when a business has a sort of abandoned and inconsistent presence on social media. It kind of makes you think, is that business still trading? Is that organization still functional? Do they really care what's going on? Do they really care about their presence and how they put themselves forward in the marketplace? So be consistent and diligent, because what you've got to remember is each of these opportunities, like each time you post, each time you create something, it's a little bit like compound interest. It sort of stacks on top of each other. It builds up. You sort of chip away at the potential customer. So consistency and diligence, they're really key. This is one, if you're only going to do one thing, actually, I'd say this is probably the most important one of all, is to be consistent, to keep posting. When you start out, especially if your business or organization is in that sort of early phase, you're probably not going to get a lot of interaction, a lot of likes, a lot of shares, any of those kinds of things. It can be a little bit disheartening, but the more consistency you can apply, the more consistently your message is going to get through, and that will start to result in better results. So it sort of snowballs a little bit as well. So, don't start as you mean to go on, basically. Do your content, post it, but be diligent and consistent in doing it. Don't just burst out for a week or two, then give up, then in 6 months' time think, I should probably do that again. And this is where, if you find this hard, looking at opportunities or tools or options around scheduling, for example, might help. If you can manage everything manually, it's not only less expensive, it's generally more effective from a performance perspective. But if you do find it really hard to commit to this, maybe looking at applications like Buffer, for example, that allow you to connect all your accounts and schedule everything for a month or 2 months or whatever in advance. That might be a way to force yourself to be consistent and diligent. So there are options there as well. And the final point I want to share around improving the performance of what you're doing is don't be afraid to have your own voice and your own personality. Some organizations and businesses, I think, are a little bit too corporate with how they do social media. You have a voice. You've got a community or an audience of people you're trying to reach who probably have a sort of some elements of shared personality to some respect. So don't be afraid to showcase who you are. There's quite a big difference between sort of corporate communications and then the sort of social media side of things. So this is where you've got an opportunity to really demonstrate who you are, what you stand for, what's important to you and your organization and your business. So don't be scared to put that out into your social media messaging. It may appeal on a sort of smaller, sort of a scale potentially, but actually a smaller, more focused audience may be a better one anyway. One thing I do want to say here though is be wary with politics. That's just one piece of advice. You can wind up opening a can of worms that you can't necessarily close again. I've seen like with what's going on at the moment and the government response to COVID-19, everyone's going to have their own perspective on what's being handled well, what could be done better. But myself, I would be very wary on LinkedIn, where I do most of my social media activity, of sharing those kind of political thoughts, because that's not it's not really relevant to what I'm trying to do. But I have seen other people I know really get stuck in on the political angle. And in some respects, it's worked quite well for them. They've got a lot of people seeing and interacting. So, if you can be a bit of a shock jock, potentially, it might actually allow you to get more reach. But is that what you want your business or organization to be known for? So you have to have a think about that. But you can sort of park politics to one side and instead, have that genuine personality and be authentic, whatever that means to you. I guess what I'm trying to say here is you don't need to pretend to be someone you're not. Like if your business is a small business and it's family run, or you run it out of your house, don't feel like you have to pretend with the way you position yourself and communicate on social media that you're some big corporate that's working out of a big fancy office and distribution facility. People want to deal with people that they can trust and they can relate to, and it may be actually that nature of your business or your organization is actually a real advantage. But if you're not being authentic about communicating that, then it's actually going to be a lot harder for people to relate to you. So have your own voice, have your own personality, but just be a little bit wary with anything that could be too contentious, unless that's really the path you want to go down. So those are the key points. Just to recap over them again really quickly. Firstly, make sure you're aligning your channels that you use, your social platforms, to your business or organization, your target audience. You probably can't be everywhere at once unless you've got a lot of resource. Be wary of that shiny object syndrome. Obviously, leverage these new opportunities as they appear, but be very careful of sort of shifting the focus to something that may just burn out and fall over, and then you've lost some of the gains you could have made on those more consistent platforms. Minimize your promotional posting, keep that powder dry for really good offers or deals or things, and leverage entertaining, informative news, human interest content instead, to get your brand out and your message out more consistently into a wider audience. Test different content types. So it might be that what works well for you on Facebook doesn't work quite so well on Twitter or LinkedIn or Pinterest. So play around with the different content types that work. Leverage user-generated content opportunities as much as you can. There's some real opportunities here, and I think a lot of businesses overlook this. Oops, I skipped one. Be responsive to people commenting, asking questions, complaints, all those kinds of things. Make it look like you really do care. Understand the problems you solve. Focus your content around those. Add value, solve people's problems, answer their questions, and that's actually going to give you a lot more content ideas as well. Be consistent and diligent in what you do. I can't remember the exact wording, but I always like that Warren Buffett quote about, someone's sitting under a tree today because they planted a seed a long time ago. It doesn't happen overnight. You have to keep chipping away at these things. And the final point, as I mentioned just before, is have your own voice and have your own personality. Don't be afraid to sort of inject who you are and who your organization is, or what it is and what it stands for, into the conversation. People will respond to that positively, in my experience. So that sort of sums everything up. If you want more advice, a couple of things I'll suggest. One is I've got a YouTube channel you can go and subscribe to. Hopefully James can share the link around to the attendees. You can go subscribe there. So I have a whole lot of different tutorials about digital marketing, not just social media, but all sorts of other things as well. sort of marketing strategy, products that might help your business, paid advertising, SEO, content marketing, all those kinds of things. And if you're on LinkedIn as well, that's where I do a lot of training and a lot of education. Look me up there. If we're not already connected, come and connect. I'll be more than glad to do that. But yeah, that sums up my presentation. So what I'll do is I'll stop the sharing for now, and then we can look to sort of answer any questions. Hopefully that helps.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sam. This is when we'd all normally give you a nice warm round of applause, and you'd see lots of smiling faces. So there's a few people who figured out the applause button. It's down in reactions for anybody else who's looking for it on the Zoom. There you go. How we're going to do questions here is, if you would like to ask your question via voice, if you click on the Manage Participants button, it should bring up a list of everyone who's in the room, and there should be a button down there that says Raise Hand. So hopefully you can find that. If you do that, then you pop to the top of my list. I'll find you, I'll call on you, and you can ask a question. If you'd rather just type your question into the type chat and have me ask it on your behalf, then I'm more than happy to do that as well. So just type it into the text chat for those of you who either don't have microphones or don't want to be on the microphone. All sound good to everyone? Excellent. In the meantime, I'm going to lead off the questions with one that kind of jumped out at me. So you mentioned that abandoning a social media platform is kind of not great, particularly if you just disappear without any kind of note. But you also mentioned that it's important that you are aware of sort of these new platforms and that there may be some first mover advantage. So if you, for example, jumped onto TikTok now because you thought it was a good platform for you, and TikTok turns out to go the way of Vine, how would you exit from a social media platform? Would you kind of post something about how you're no longer posting here, but people can find you other places? Would you delete your accounts so that nobody ever could find them again? What's the story?
That's an excellent question, actually. And there's kind of a couple of elements to it. In some instances, your hand simply may be forced. So if we think about, say, Google Plus, for example, they just kind of stopped existing, right? They shut the platform down. You didn't really have a choice. An email came out that said, hey, we're shutting this thing down. We're going to stop serving you, basically. You didn't really have a choice in the matter. And that can be one pathway where like I said, your hand is forced. You just kind of have to manage things. And to go back to that example of Google Plus, a lot of people were actually disappointed because quite a few people liked it. It just never really caught on. It did have some pretty cool functionalities in some respect, though. If you decide a platform isn't for you or your organization, and my view is the best way to do it is to say, right, be public about it. Actually say, hey, look, we're making a choice to focus our efforts elsewhere, or based off. I mean, you can dress it up, but that's sometimes where that kind of corporate speak can be a little bit handy in the sense of saying, hey, look, we're going to actually, we've revisited what makes sense to us as an organization or a business. We want to focus on different things. What I wouldn't do is just disappear overnight without a trace, if you get what I mean. Like that's what I would avoid doing, if you get what I'm saying.
Excellent. So I've got a few questions flowing through from people. So one of the questions was, is there any ways you can make sure you're engaging with real followers and real people instead of, either other businesses just there to try and generate reach, or robots, or any of the other entities that are floating around on social media?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it kind of also is a little bit dependent on what platform you use. Part of it, I think, is over time as you develop your skills, you kind of develop a bit of a filter for people who are going to come through and be sort of other businesses or organizations that are trying to leverage your own audience for their own ends. Or things that are just straight up bots and scams and things like that, or spam. So to give you an example, like on my YouTube channel, every time I post a video, almost immediately afterwards, I'll get 2 or 3 of these kind of auto-generated comments that come through that'll say like, "Oh, great video, I really enjoyed that." They're not real people. That's just a software that's being used to try and get you to go and look at their channel. So when you first start out, you're kind of like, "Oh, this is awesome, man. People are really engaging with what I'm doing," but you pick up pretty quickly. It's the same accounts every time. It's the same messaging. It's not genuine, so you don't engage with it. And I think, what you have to do is just build up that kind of, excuse the language, but bullshit filter, if you get what I mean. Just to really start thinking, okay, is this a genuine person I'm interacting with? Is it a genuine opportunity? LinkedIn's a really good example of where this happens all the time. Is, someone will send you like a connection request, because I've seen in the chat a few people are talking about personal branding. So on that personal side of things, people will send you a connection request, and then the nanosecond they do it, they're not interested in you. They just want to pitch you something. And as you get a little bit more skilled and a little bit more knowledgeable on these platforms, you start to pick up those warning signs. As far as trying to get proper engagement goes, if we take something like a Facebook page, for example, let's say that you start doing some advertising to try and build it up. Don't focus too much on huge numbers of people. Quality is more important. I think where a lot of people get into trouble here and things can go a little bit awry is that people don't focus enough on the quality side of things. They kind of say, "Oh, I just want to get a big audience." And in that big audience, you can wind up risking getting people who are just not engaged, not interested. Better to have a smaller, more focused, more relevant audience, and that's going to minimize that risk. So if you can do that, and then also if you can build up that kind of internal defense mechanism against, hey, I'm able to pick up that this looks like a bot account that's communicating with me, or this looks like someone who just wants to connect with me on LinkedIn to try and pitch me something, you're going to, be able to minimize the impacts of that. I hope that helps.
So on that personal note, there'll be a bunch of people in the room who obviously have personal social media connections, but then are also either running their own ventures or particularly club executives and things like that. Any sort of advice on how much overlap between your personal social media presence and your professional social media presence?
I think that really comes down to how comfortable you are and what sort of, with sort of sharing the two and to what sort of business you run. So if I look at my own business, for example, I trade under my name, Sam Frost. So there's always going to be an element of overlap between my business, which, under which, I trade under my own name, and then also the personal side of things. Now, I've got my own personal Facebook profile. I don't really talk about work on there. I keep it separate. I've got a business page, LinkedIn's slightly different because it's a professional platform, but it kind of comes down to how comfortable you are. Like some people are very comfortable with saying, "I've started a new business or an organization and I'm going to really, evangelize about that to my personal contacts, to my friends and my family." And other people might say, "Hey, I want to keep the two totally separate." Probably if you trade under like a brand name, so not your own personal name, but, an actual company name or an organization name, you're probably better, in my opinion, in the first instance, to try and separate things off as much as you can. It kind of protects your own personal privacy a little bit more. Like when I first started my company, I actually traded under a company name that still exists, but I'd made a conscious decision to pivot towards using my personal name and sort of building more of a personal brand. But it was quite a hard decision to make, and it's not a decision to make lightly. So think about, firstly, whatever you're doing, whether it's building a business or an organization, does it have relevance to the people you're connected with? Would your friends and family be interested in hearing it? If they would, then, what I would say is create your company or your corporate profile, whether it's a Facebook page or whatever, and then tell people, "Hey, look, this is what I'm working on at the moment. If it's interesting to you, can you go and like it? Can you share it? If you know anyone, can you tell them about it?" But probably try and separate the two off and that sort of day-to-day practicality level as much as you can, if only it's going to sort of, keep your own identity a little bit more safe.
Excellent. The next question I have is around how you can produce content when you don't have a sort of tangible physical product or service. that I guess lends itself more to talking about. So what sort of strategies are there for the intangible side of things?
So I guess it depends on how intangible we're talking. Like, are we looking at, say, is it a software product, or is it something that
It's more of a service product.
Okay, service product. Okay. So if it's a service product, I mean, yeah, sure, you're probably going to struggle more to come up with that sort of user-generated type content. If it's a service product, user-generated content may be more things like testimonial type content. So I use the service, and this is what I got out of it, and you can share that messaging if your clients, customers, are happy with that. I would also, in that case, be looking more at possibly, instead of user-generated content, maybe industry content. So, if you're doing a service, like if I thought about my service, is obviously I don't have amazing opportunities in some respects for user-generated content. I don't ship a product or anything like that. Some clients are obviously happy to go on the record and say, hey, look, I had a good experience here. But there's all sorts of industry content I can talk about. So what's happening in your industry? What's changing? What's new? What's come up? In the last couple of weeks, for example, Google have announced that they're going to give free ad grants to small, medium businesses. Well, that's something I can talk about. So with your, intangible business, your intangible product or service, I guess think beyond just, I can't take a photo of a physical thing, so it doesn't really exist, and more think about what other information or content out there would sort of associate nicely with that. Because what that's also going to help you do for a lot of service businesses is that actually helps you position yourself as an expert as well. Because not only are you talking about your own product or service, you're kind of that portal that people can come to, and they can go, right, if I follow this particular person's profile, they're going to keep me updated on what's happening in the industry, what I need to be aware of, what I need to know. So that can be a really good way to come up with content ideas too.
Cool. Excellent. I'm going to combine a couple of questions here because they're both sort of related to algorithms, and particularly, for example, Facebook. So one of them is around, is it true that once you start doing sponsored posts, it starts to impact your organic reach? So you should be cautious about sponsoring posts if you don't have a big budget to sponsor every post.
Yeah.
And the other one is, how often can you be promoting before you start to get negatively filtered by, I guess, either people or the algorithms?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll touch on the first one first, because that's a really interesting question. It's sort of, I guess, if I can use the term marketing conspiracies, it's probably one of the more prevalent ones, one of the things I've heard more frequently. The same goes, a similar one for Google is, if I start paying for Google ads, the ads you see when you search, they're going to take my business down the organic rankings if I stop paying for those ads. And it's the same with that Facebook idea. If I start paying for boosted posts or Facebook ads and I stop paying for them, Facebook, is going to basically penalize me for stopping giving them money. Now, my experience, my view has been this is not the case. It's probably more of a perception issue. I'm not going to deny that some people swear this has happened to them, and everyone's sort of reality is true to them. But from a purely sort of algorithmic perspective, I don't think that happens. What has happened over time is organic reach has been dragged down on Facebook and on most social media platforms. The reason being that, Facebook wants to make money. That's what they exist to do. They're a large publicly listed entity that their duty is to their shareholders and not really to anyone else. And the way they make money is by getting businesses to pay for advertising. I think probably it's like that kind of, I can't remember the name for what this is actually called, but like if I drive a red car, if I drive a red Toyota Corolla, I see red Toyota Corollas everywhere. Someone might be able to pipe up in the chat who's a lot better educated than I am and tell me what that's called.
The availability effect.
Oh, there you go. You're better educated than I am. So you win there. But it's kind of like that. Like once you start paying for ads, it probably focuses your attention a little bit more on how things are performing organically as well. And that there's going to be quite a gulf in performance then, and you're probably going to notice what was already happening anyway. So yeah, I hope that helps.
Sorry, just ended up muting myself. Excellent. And then in terms of the frequency of posting.
Oh yeah, yeah. Yeah, so as far as that frequency of posting goes, there's not an exact ratio I can give you because it's a bit of a how long is a piece of string question. But what I usually say is, hey, start at probably like 90-10. So 90% of what you post is informative, it's funny, it's entertaining, it's engaging, it's problem solving, question answering, non-promotional content. And then 10% of the time, push product, push service, push offers. And then you can scale up or down from there, and just play around with what's going to be most effective. What I'm trying to encourage people to do here is get as much of that sort of rolling reach and engagement as they can, so that when you do come to promote, instead, because there's nothing more disappointing than you go and post a link to your event ticket sales or whatever it is on Facebook, and then like 5 people and their cats have seen it, and that's because you've got bad organic reach to begin with. So what I'm just trying to do is say, hey, almost try and game the algorithm a little bit, and so to do that, you want to start off as ideally as sort of non-promotional as you can, and then you can play around from there. But think maybe 90-10 to start with is probably a good starting point.
Righto. Thank you. We've got a few questions left, so if you're happy to keep going, we can keep chipping away at them. The next one is about the process of being consistent for an event business that holds an event once a year in particular. So obviously they've got lots of stuff in the lead up to and during the event, but then there's a really low period. Any advice for seasonal operations?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, actually. I mean, what I would do here is a couple of things. One is when the event is on, around that busy period where you're really planning and you're putting all the wheels into motion, and you're doing the event itself, and then the sort of post-event, collect as much content as you can, images, videos, all those kinds of things, because you can probably stretch it out over quite a long period of time. And then throughout the rest of the year, I don't know what the event is, but think about what other kinds of information people attending this event, what would they want to hear about? So if the event was, say, like a home show, ideas for home improvement, maybe you can only really talk about the event itself around the time, and you're going to run out of content to post. But throughout the year, the people who attend that event are still going to have the same kind of questions and challenges and problems and everything that they had when they were going to that event. It's not like the nanosecond the event stops, the interest in that industry or topic stops. So it's trying to think, what kinds of industry information could you share? What's happening in the industry? Maybe even like asking, what would you like to see at the event next year? Next time we run it. Dripping out the content you do get through the event throughout the year as well. Keeping people in anticipation. Hey, it's 3 months until we're holding this event again. What was your highlight from last year? So there is actually probably a lot more than you think you can do. It's just being creative with sort of spreading out what you've got.
Excellent. The next question I've got is around, I guess, a generic LinkedIn as a student club.
Yep.
So any sort of advice that will help, I guess, particularly around trying to manage that personal professional boundary on LinkedIn, and what clubs should be aiming to do through LinkedIn as opposed to other channels.
Yep. Yeah. So what I'd be doing on LinkedIn for a club is create your LinkedIn company page, but effectively it's acting for a club. And then I would be using it basically as almost like a micro blog or a micro website. So posting updates, what's the club been up to, what's coming up, here's photos or videos from events, people who are representatives, members of the club, the executive, I would be, encouraging them them on their personal LinkedIn profiles to share, hey, go and follow, XYZ Club. We've got a company page or a club page, you could call it, set up on LinkedIn. And just that sort of sharing what you're up to, being authentic. Hey, we ran this event yesterday. It was a real success. We had 100 people turn out. Here's some photos. We'll be posting more throughout the week. And then it's going to actually allow you to have quite a lot to talk about. So hopefully, that helps there.
Excellent. Working on my spacebar to unmute myself thing. Just getting confused about which window I'm in. So we've done that one. We've done that one. Okay, so somebody's asking, they've been sorry, I missed one. What do you think is going to change in the next few months, especially changing consumer behavior preference? Do you have any predictions for these times of uncertainty?
If only I had a crystal ball. There's a lot of things I'd be doing if I did. I think what's going to change substantially, it's an unfortunate fact that there's going to be a lot of people, in difficult situations because of this. There's going to be a big economic impact. There's going to be, all the flow-on consequences of that, job losses, income reduction, all those kinds of things. Now, what that means is a couple of things. One, it means you probably need to be a little bit cautious of how you message. So being wary and sensitive to the fact that people aren't necessarily in a good space at the moment. I've seen a couple of people. I saw one person post something on LinkedIn the other day, where he just got totally chewed out for it. He actually deleted it because I think from what I can gather, he's been very successful in the past in business, this guy. And he basically, was sort of saying, oh, it's disgrace that businesses are still trying to promote themselves at the moment. We should all be just, sitting at home doing, watching Netflix and sort of getting in behind what the government's promoting, which is true to some extent. But, everyone jumped on and said, hey, look, it's easy for you to say because, you've done really well, but we've got to try and put food on the table. We're looking down the barrel of, massive reduction in revenue, laying off staff, all these horrible things. And he really, I haven't seen someone get flamed that bad in a long time, to be honest. And it was just very tone deaf to what's going on at the moment. So be careful of the tone. I think that's going to become more and more important. As customer preferences change, I think, people are going to have less disposable income, to spend. So what that's going to mean is that you're going to have to demonstrate your value more than ever with what you're doing. So people are probably going to be less inclined to just buy things on a whim. And it's more going to be about thinking, hey, I've got to consider this purchase a bit more. So with your social media activity, going back to that point about think really intently, what is my value here? What problem do I solve? Because someone I know and trust a lot in marketing, he said to me once, in the absence of value, I question the price. So if I don't see the value of a product or a service, especially anything like a software product or a business to business product, anything like that, or even a consumer product, if I can't see the value of that to me, I'm going to question the price of it. And people are going to be more price sensitive now than they have been in a very long time. So I think that's the changing sort of landscape we're dealing with. So it's about how you package your offering. It's about how you communicate your value. It's really understanding better than you've ever understood before. What do I bring to the table for people? Is it that I save their business time, and time is money at the moment because they're short on staff because they had to lay staff off? I don't know exactly what you do. It's going to depend on what you do, but really focus on that value proposition side of things.
Awesome. I think that's the last substantive question we've got, but there's a couple nitty gritty ones that I'll quick fire at you. So Margot asks about, she's been asked to do an educational video to help with a class assignment. Best platform, YouTube or Facebook video, given the students will either be watching as a class online or potentially if they're back in school after the lockdown?
I'd use YouTube for this one. It's easy to send someone to a YouTube link. You can control the privacy of it easily. So you could make it an unlisted video. So they have to have the link rather than having it necessarily public and searchable. So I think YouTube would be a great option there. If it's only one video, another option you could look at, if you don't want any ads or anything to possibly get embedded on the start or the end of it, there's something called Wistia, which you get a free account and 3 videos, I think, and it's like a professional video embedding platform. So you sometimes with YouTube, if you get ads that you don't necessarily want people to see, start or partway through the video or at the end. Wistia is a paid tool, but with the free plan, you get a few videos you can upload. And so that might be another option as well. And you can just send people a link. But yeah, YouTube over Facebook here if it's an argument between the two.
Excellent. And one final nitty gritty one.
Yep.
Setting up a Facebook page that's not linked to your personal page. Like
okay. So there's always got to be some element of kind of having a personal presence in the background. But what I would do here is use Business Manager. So you can create, if you go to business.facebook.com it is, or Google Facebook Business Manager and set that up, you can move your basically that's the best option they've got for disassociating your personal life on Facebook with your business life. So you manage the page and any ad accounts and anything through the Business Manager. It also makes it 1,000 times easier if you want to ever down the track, say, work with an agency or a consultant or something like that. You can add them as a user, you can control the permissions. It's basically a much nicer version of sort of adding people to your page. So yeah, look up Facebook Business Manager and that's going to give you the functionality I think you want there.
Excellent. I think that was our last question. So we've done pretty well. If I did miss any questions, feel free to ping something into the chat right now and we'll make sure we get them all answered. But
just scrolling back up, the only other thing I think we've missed is someone was asking around, with consistency, is it quality or quantity that matters more? Quality is definitely more important than just sheer quantity. If you can only do, if you can keep good quality and do quantity, that's the best. But look, if you can say, hey, look, I can do one quality piece of content a week for my social presence, or I can do 3 really average things. Do the one good one. That's going to help you more. And then work on strategies and methods to actually allow you to scale up quality content production over time. So for example, if you're faster at getting your ideas out on video, as opposed to say writing them, then look at doing video, for example, but focus on quality first because, people can see through thin content basically.
Righto. Excellent.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much for giving your time to us today. I'll just remind everyone to check out the UCE Centre for Entrepreneurship social media channels. We'll be doing some more stuff, I guess, in response to some of the thinking today. So
perfect.
Really appreciate your time. And thank you everyone who came out to listen. This video will go up onto the UC Centre for Entrepreneurship website, and I'll post a link to it in the Facebook event as well. So that's where you can find it if you want to review stuff or go back and check things.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much, guys, for showing up. And yeah, thanks for all the questions and hopefully see you at another event.